Hello, everyone. With the recent news and announcements, I wanted to give a summary and thoughts on both the Intel Arc video card and the AMD 7900XT. The reason I want to do that is because I think it's blown out of proportion in some aspects, and in other aspects, some things were not mentioned. I will do my best to relay this all, but I do ask that if I mess up with my wording, please be understanding and politely comment in the comment section. In the past, I have made mistakes when wording things related to computer stuff, and I fully admit that. However, at the time, I was trying to think of two different topics at the same time. Because I was thinking of two different topics at the same time, I got the wordings mix matched. Now, I'm not saying that's an excuse, but I am saying that with the way I am, that happens very frequently. Unfortunately, I think about too many things at one time, and it's really hard for me to separate the thoughts or slow down. That's just how I am, and I just can't change that. I certainly try to work around it, but I can't change that. Okay, moving on. I want to start with Intel. In order to properly relay everything with Intel, I need to talk about the company as well as the video card. I'll start with the video card, though. Supposedly, the Intel Arc video card that surfaced as an engineering sample is the top of the line one. If it is the top of the line one, then its compute performance beat the 3070 Ti. Keep in mind, this is just the compute performance. I have not seen anything related to video game benchmarks. Compute performance is as far as I've seen with any tests on that engineering sample. However, that is a very good sign, though, that an engineering sample is outcomputing a 3070 Ti. It does show that the video card, when it does go to full production model, has a very good chance of competing with the existing video card companies. However, I do wonder how limited its performance will be in certain aspects. As Gamers Nexus did point out, there are certain technologies or software involved with the other video cards that allow them to process or compress video data much quicker than normal. That's something that Nvidia and AMD have both developed over the many years that they've been video card manufacturers. Because Intel is just jumping into this, it's highly unlikely that they'll have a similar technology or software in place. So that's kind of the summary on the Intel video card. Now, before I can get into my thoughts on the video card, I have to give you a summary of the company. Intel is really nothing new when it comes to corporations. All corporations have scummy practices in one way or another. It's just part of the corporation world, unfortunately. However, some are more scummy than others, and I think Intel certainly is up there in the scummy scale, should a scummy scale exist. The reason for this is if you look at Intel's history and current news, you'll notice that they do their best to push out the competition as much as possible, by any means necessary. Back in 2008 or 9, they were hit with an antitrust lawsuit, claiming that they were using backdoor deals with brand name companies to push out AMD, in the sense that AMD wouldn't be the company that these brands would use. That's what Intel tried to do back then. They just recently appealed that lawsuit and got it overturned. But it goes to show that they do try that kind of backdoor deal stuff. And then there are some other things to add to that. When Intel was getting beaten by AMD Ryzen, and I think it was either the I think it was the 3000 series. I think it was the 3000 series when AMD started beating Intel. Somebody can correct me if they got a longer memory than I do on that front, but I think it was around the 3000 series. And when that was happening, Intel used their sponsorship just to push out as many CPUs as they can. I would imagine it's because they realized they couldn't win in backdoor deals, because if they got caught, they would be slapped with antitrust lawsuits. So what they did instead was, during that time, they used their sponsorship side to push out as many chips as they could. Obviously, a content creator or an esport player won't say no to a free CPU. I sure as heck won't, if it's a good CPU, of course. But that's what they were doing right around that time, and they're still doing it to a certain degree, in which they're giving out these, well, quote-unquote free, I should say, CPUs to these content creators and esport players. Obviously, there is some sort of deal in place for those, but at the end of the day, they don't have to pay any money for it. It's just a matter of content creation and time, really, is the payment here. But other than that, yes, it's mostly free CPUs. And that's just how they're keeping their content creators and esport players on the Intel platform. Unfortunately, AMD can't respond to that because they don't have the financial horsepower that Intel does. They don't have the ability to truly sponsor like Intel does. So that's more or less what's going on there with that. I guess it really isn't as scummy, but Intel does change motherboards every generation. AMD proved very recently that it is possible to use backwards compatibility with motherboards. I really wish that was a feature that was standard, but it doesn't seem Intel cares about that. I'm sure that it could be done if AMD did it. Intel has far better financial resources than AMD, so they should have the R&D budget to find a way to make their motherboards backwards compatible too. In the old days, it would have been okay to do that because that was the only thing you really could do in that situation, but nowadays it's more possible to do that. Either way, that's kind of the summary of the Intel company. Now my thoughts. As you can see on my screen, Intel has been opening up more fabrication plants. Their fabrication plants are going to be the ones making these Intel video cards, supposedly. That means that there is a very good chance that they could outproduce both AMD and Nvidia in terms of units of video cards. If that's the case, then I'm very concerned that they're going to resort to the previously mentioned scummy tactics in this summary that I just gave. However, I will say that the one benefit of this all is competition, of course. With more competition being in the field, there's a good chance that it will force AMD and Nvidia to do better with pricing. I think, at least for the first generation of Intel video cards, it probably will only be good as a workstation video card. It might do okay with gaming, but not as good as AMD and Nvidia. That's kind of my thoughts on this whole thing as to where it's going. Of course, they can always prove me wrong. But either way, yes, I think that that's where things are going to go with it. If things go in that trajectory, then Intel would be competing with, really, Nvidia for workstation, because you really don't see AMD workstation video cards as nearly as much as Nvidia. So more than likely it would force Nvidia more so than AMD to have better pricing. Now, if it does, in some miracle in the capacity, have the ability to compete with the two in gaming, then that would add another front in which they can compete and force prices to be better. I'm fine with that, just as long as Intel doesn't do any more scummy things. So that's really all I can say on this matter until more video cards show up and more data is presented, because seeing the flagship video card of the family really isn't much of an indicator. It's a great source of data, but it's not going to tell the whole story. You have to see the whole family of video cards in order to see all that. So, moving on to AMD. Let me tab over. So, as I understand it, AMD's first chiplet design video card is called the 7900XT. That's what I've seen with plenty of other YouTube videos from reputable sources or channels, whatever you want to use for wording. If that's the case, then we'll just use the 7900XT for this entirety. Okay, so let's start with what is chiplet design and why it's so important. Okay, so I'm going to oversimplify this. If you want the long, detailed explanation, I'll link this article and one other, and you're more than welcome to read that on your own time. But what chiplet design does is, more or less, it changes the process in which the processor is made. Well, or in this case, a video card. Because AMD does have the chiplet design for their processors, just not the video card quite yet. But either way, let's just, for analogy purposes, say that you print one sheet, which becomes the processor. Well, what the chiplet design is doing is it's taking that printing process and it's now not printing one page, it's now printing pieces of a page, kind of like a Lego set. What that does is it allows the manufacturer to produce cheaper processor or video cards, more or less. In addition to lowering the cost of the research and development as well as the manufacturing costs, another thing the chiplet design does is it changes the materials that you can use. If you want to use a chiplet for a special purpose, you can do that because now you've separated it into different pieces. So you can assign chiplet A to semiconductor duties, or you can do something like assign chiplet B to processing. That's all possible in the chiplet design. So you can not only assign special purposes, but you can change the materials in which you use. That means that the chiplet design doesn't always use silicon. If anything, it uses less silicon than it normally would for a one-page processor. Silicon is the main material for most computer things. So yeah, it's a pretty big deal when you're talking about reducing the usage of a hard-to-come-by resource that's used in almost everything computer. Let me just tab over real quickly to show you an example of how far you can take this. Back in 2021, ARM and another company that I'm not sure how to pronounce or anything did come out with a processor design that involved plastic. Plastic is not well recycled today, but this does go to show that there are possibilities out there. If a chiplet design can make use of plastic instead of silicon or even other materials, that would be really, really cool to see. Because then we wouldn't have such a reliance on an already hard-to-come-by material. But either way, this is just an example to show you how far you can take the chiplet design. Is that there are other processes being researched like this that could certainly be implemented into the chiplet design. So let me tab back. Okay. So that's what a chiplet design is. Now, the AMD 7900XT is going to be the first video card to use this chiplet design. So what this means for you, more than likely, and of course, once release day comes, I'm sure there will be either changes to what we know or potentially there will be more added to what we know. But either way, the 7900XT comes out in December, according to Lisa Su, the CEO of AMD. When it does come out, if it does work really well with gaming, then that means it will present the consumer with a lower cost alternative to high-end performance over Nvidia. That's essentially what the chiplet design is going to do in this situation. Granted, AMD hasn't had a great history of video card drivers, which is the software you need to work with the video card, but the fact of the matter is they've mastered the engineering or hardware side of things. As long as they can master the software side of things, then they should be in a very good position to present something to the consumer base that has an advantage over Nvidia, because really Nvidia is AMD's main competitor right now. We have yet to see if Intel's ARC GPUs will be a competitor, but for right now, Nvidia is their main competitor. So, yeah, we'll have to see what happens, but more than likely, it will give you an advantage in gaming, assuming that this is going to be a gaming video card, which I'm guessing it is because the 7900XT was a gaming video card, or at least very good at it. So, given that it's using the same family numbering and lettering scheme, I would assume that this is also for gaming. So yeah, we'll wait and see. I just want to deviate real quickly and end this recording with one topic. For content creators, they have two encoding methods, X264, which is CPU, and there is also NVENC, NVENC for short, which is NVIDIA's video card encoding method. Now, I brought this up before in past recordings, so I won't go into a huge spiel about it, but one of the things that AMD is lacking in comparison to NVIDIA is having their own encoder. Because right now, a lot of content creators really want NVENC. I think that NVENC's great in certain circumstances, but I don't think it's the solution to all forms of encoding for content creators. X264 is a phenomenal encoding method that requires minimal knowledge in comparison to NVENC, which does require some knowledge as to what you're doing. Not just in the settings, but also where to look in your computer for percent usage and things like that. So yeah, I think that AMD needs to create their own encoding method if they are going to have value or an advantage over Nvidia. I think it's entirely within their wheelhouse to do that. As I mentioned in a past recording, they've done a really good job with APUs. I think that if they can make a higher wattage desktop APU, maybe 95 watts, 90 would be preferable, that can run a hybrid encoding using both CPU and the APU side of things, I think that would give them an advantage over Nvidia, because then content creators can utilize one processor versus being restricted to one video card. Because with the processor, it's a lot more forgiving in terms of what brand it is, just as long as it's high performance. So that's kind of my reasoning why I think AMD just needs to add to their advantages by creating their own encoder. The 7900XT will certainly give them an advantage in certain regards, but I think to add to their advantages that they're going to have at the end of this year, supposedly by Lisa Su, they should also work on their own encoder. But that's all I have to say on this. Thanks for listening.